Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at the second story from chapter 42 of the Road to Latin textbook. Now this story is called De Proelio Romano, and it's talking about how the Roman army fights in battle, and it's going to be specifically referencing a real battle between Julius Caesar and the Helvetii tribe at the beginning of the Gallic Wars. So before we dive too far into it, like I always tell you with these videos, if you want more resources, feel free to check out my website. You can find everything you need there. I know this is the second video for this chapter, so hopefully at this point you're feeling pretty good with vocab and the grammar. But if you need a refresher, it's always there for you. You can see my notes, vocab, Quizlets, things like that, whatever you might need. So you can also see the story in a different way if you want to see it with the cases highlighted to just help you read it. So it's always there for you. Take a look and use it for whatever you need. Now, before we dive into the story, like I always tell you in these videos, you want to make sure that you are feeling really good about the vocab and the grammar now that you're into the second story. So hopefully you're in that place. If not, go back, review it a little bit, and then kind of dive into the story once you've done that so you have a better shot of understanding it. The other thing you want to do is make sure that you're reading the story out loud. So find a partner in class, anyone you can, read it to them, right? That way you're working on your speaking, your pronunciation, have them read it back to you so you can work on your listening skills. These are really great ways to make sure you're actually understanding the Latin. You never want to shut those parts of your brain off. The other thing I always tell you, use the read and reread method, right? You've heard me say this a million times. Read through the story, write down any problem areas you're having as you go. When you're done with your read completely, look at your list, right? And see where you went wrong. If it's vocab, that's really easy. Just look the words up and you'll figure it out. If it's grammar, it's probably the grammar from this chapter. So that would mean it's a red flag. You need to go back and work on that a little bit more. If it's not from this chapter, kind of go back and see. Maybe it's a verb ending you don't recognize. Try to unpack it and see where you're going wrong, or use this video to kind of understand it a little bit better. But one way or another, you want to try to shore up those problem areas. And kind of get better as you go. And you keep repeating that process. So you read it second, third, fourth, as many times as you need to. You just keep doing that over and over again. And eventually you're going to hit a point where you can read this story start to finish. You don't need any help. You understand all of it or pretty close to all of it. And you can feel confident in your translation. That's how you know you're ready to move on and you really absorb what's going on. So if you haven't done that yet, pause the video, go back and work on it. Otherwise, let's go through the story. And like I said, as long as your translation is somewhere pretty close to mine, it doesn't have to be the exact same thing. But if it's in the same kind of general area, you can feel pretty confident that you're understanding it and that you're ready to move on with it. Okay, so story starts like this, right? And again, we're talking about Roman battle, so we're still talking about the Roman army. But you have Caesar, aciem in coli instruebat, quod milites a superiore loco pila in hostes facilios mitere poteran. So again, this story is kind of starting in the middle of a battle is kind of the idea. So you're saying Caesar, there's your subject. So instruebat is the idea of drawing up a battle line is really what it is. So aciem instruebat means he was drawing up a battle line, meaning kind of organizing his army. And he does it in cole, on a hill. Okay, so he did it on a hill, quod, because, or so that you might say, the milites, his soldiers, were able, poterant mitere, they were able to send, right? And again, when you're talking about sending pila, which are the javelins they throw, it means really throwing, right? When they say mitere, it's talking about throwing. So it's saying that his soldiers were able to send facilius more easily, the pila, the javelins, into the enemy in hostes. A superiore loco means from the higher place, right? The higher location. So the idea is that Caesar drew his battle line up on a hill so that they could throw the javelins downhill. Okay. Then you have clarissimo proelio helvetico Caesar maiorem partem colis militibus complevit. Okay. So you're saying in the most famous battle with the Helvetii, right? Helvetico. If you don't know who that is, the Helvetii are a tribe that Caesar fights in the beginning of the Gallic Wars, right? It kind of starts the Gallic Wars. So in the most famous battle with the Helvetii, Caesar filled, right, complevit, right? He filled the greater part, the maiorem partem, the greater part of the hill, militibus, with his soldiers, right? So this high ground, he basically fills the hill with soldiers. Then you have in cole medio, triplicem aciem instruxit legionem quatuor veteranarum. There we go, right? So it's talking about on the hill in cole, right? And on the middle of the hill, rather, in the middle of the hill. He instruxit, he drew up his triplicem aciem, his triple battle line, right? This is what we learned in the first story of chapter 42, that famous triple battle line formation. So on the middle of the hill, he drew that up, right? And it's this triple triple battle line of 4 veteran legions, right? Legionem veteranarum, right? There's the word. Don't stumble over it, okay? So he draws up his 4 legions, they're veteran legions, and he has them on top of a hill. Okay. Then you have in sumo cole duas legiones quas proxime conscripserat atque auxilia convocavit. Okay, so on the top of the hill, so in the middle of the hill, he has the triple battle line with his 4 veteran legions. On top of the hill, right, in sumo cole, he placed convocavit, right, he placed duas legiones, right, 2 legions, so 2 other legions, and they're 2 legions which, here's your relative clause here, which he had conscripted, rather, conscripserat, right, it's pluperfect, which he had conscripted proxime last, right, most recently. And he also put, or convocavit, he placed the auxilia, the auxiliary troops, okay? So when he draws up his battle line in this famous encounter with the Helvetii, right, he puts sort of the middle of the hill is the meat of his army, the veteran legions. And on top of the hill in the back, that's where he puts all the auxiliaries and the legions that he's not entirely sure of, right, the ones that he had just recruited. So we read this in the first story from chapter 42. He didn't want to put his most inexperienced troops in the front of the line. That wouldn't go well. So he puts them in the back. Then you have the next paragraph. You have Iam Helvetii, primae Achaeae Caesaris apropinquant. So now the Helvetii, right, they approach, apropinquant, right, they approach the first battle line, the primae Achaeae, right, the first line of Caesar, right? So the Helvetii are approaching his battle line. Then you have quod hostes non longe absunt, Caesar signum dat. Right? So since or because the enemy was not far away, right? Non absunt longe means was not away, right? And the longe is the far part, right? So since they weren't far away, Caesar signum dat, right? Caesar gives the signal. So in other words, he gives the signal for his men to attack. Then you have statim milites primae Achaeae pila in Helvetios venientes miton. So immediately the milites, the soldiers of the first battle line, primae Achaeae, right? So the soldiers of the first battle line, they send miton, meaning they throw pila, the javelins, into the Helvetios, right? The Helvetii, and then you have the present participle here, venientes, the approaching or the oncoming Helvetii, right? So the venientes there is describing Helvetios, right? So it's the Helvetii kind of coming up the hill. So the first battle line, they throw their pila. Then you have tum omnes milites gladiis diu atque acriter pugnant, right? So then all the soldiers, right, omnes milites, all the soldiers, they fight pugnant, right? They fight with their gladiis, with their swords, right, the gladius that they have. And they fight diu atque acriter, so they fight for a long time and fiercely, right, acriter. So they fight fiercely and they're fighting for a long time, right? It's kind of a drawn-out battle. Then we go to the next paragraph, and you have tandem Helvetii vulneribus defessi ad proximum colum se recipiunt. So finally, or at last, the Helvetii, they're described as defessi, right? Tired or kind of exhausted, worn out, however you want to do it. Tired from their wounds, vulneribus, right? Tired because of their wounds. They se recipiunt. They literally like withdraw themselves. It's an idiom Caesar uses for retreating, right? So they retreat ad proximum colum. So they retreat to a nearby hill, right? So a proximum colum, to a nearby hill. Then you have eo in cole, aciam instruunt, right? So on that hill, eo in cole, so on that hill, they drew up, right? They kind of draw up their aciam, their battle line. So instruunt there means they draw up. So on that hill, they drew up a battle line, okay? Then you have sed Romani, victoria audaces ad eum colum currunt et impetum iterum faciunt. So they draw up a battle line, meaning the Helvetii, but the Romans, right, the Romani, they're described as audaces, right, bold, almost like emboldened is kind of the meaning, but bold from the victory or because of the victory. Victoria there is the ablative. So bold from their victory, they run, currunt, they run to that hill, ad eum colum, and they impetum faciunt, they make an attack. The impetum is the attack. Iterum means again, so they again make an attack, right? So they attack again the Helvetii on this other hill. Okay. Then you have the next paragraph. You have auxilia Helvetiorum, quae erant in novissimo agmine et in primo Proelio non pugnaverant, Romanos ad eum colum currentes vident. Okay, so the auxilia Helvetiorum, so the auxiliary troops, the auxiliary troops of the Helvetii, right, of the Helvetians. Then you have quae, who, it's referring back to the auxilia, right, who were in the newest battle line, right, in that new battle line, novissimo agmine. So the ones in the new battle line, or who were in the new battle line, they non pugnaverunt, they had not fought in primo proelio, in the first battle, right? So in that first battle, they hadn't fought. These are all the auxiliaries, okay? So now these men, these fresh auxiliaries or kind of troops for the Helvetii, they see the Romanos, the Romans, currentes ad eum colum, running, right? Currentes is your present participle. It's describing Romanos, right? Running ad eum colum, to the hill, right? So now they see the Romans charging up the hill at them. Okay. So next you have potueruntne, rather, circum venire Romanos in cole pugnantes, right? We're asking a question. The NE means we're asking a yes or no question where we're not sure what the answer is, right? So the authors are giving you sort of a question to get you thinking. So it says, are they able, circum venire, to encircle, right? To go around, right? The Romans in cole pugnantes, fighting on the hill. Right, so the question is, are they able to get around the Romans? And again, pugnantes is describing Romanos fighting on the hill, right? So can they go around them? That's kind of the question here. Okay, then you have maxima celeritate ab novissimo agmine militibus Romanis appropinquant. Okay, so with the greatest speed, maxima celeritate. Okay, so with the greatest speed, they approach, appropinquant, right? They approach the Roman soldiers, the militibus Romanis, and again, it's dative because appropinquare takes a dative, right? That compound verb. So they approach the Roman soldiers from the new battle line, right? So in other words, they charge out at the Roman soldiers. Okay. Then we continue that paragraph, and you have nunc Romani sunt inter copias hostium. So now the Romans, right, the Roman soldiers really, are between, they're between the copias hostium, they're between the troops of the enemy, right? So now it's all mixed together. The Romans are fighting the Helvetii, okay? And you have sed magna est virtus Caesaris exercitus. But literally, great is the virtue, but you might want to translate it as, but the virtue is great, right, of the army, exercitus, of Caesar, right? So in other words, of Caesar's army. They're very virtuous and valiant, right? So he has really good troops is the idea here. Okay, so then you have prima et secunda acies cum helvetis acriter pugnant. Okay, so the first and the second, the prima et secunda acies, right, battle line. So the first and second battle line, they fight fiercely, acriter pugnant, right? They fight, or the battle line, it's individual, right? So the first battle line fights fiercely, and the second battle line fights fiercely, right? Fights fiercely cum helvetis, with the Helvetii. Right, so they're fighting fiercely. Then you have the tertia acies, right? The third battle line, severtit, right? Turned itself, et cum helvetiorum auxiliis venientibus pugnat, right? So the third battle line turns themselves around, and they fight, right? Or it fights rather, pugnat, with the auxiliis, with the auxiliary troops, helvetiorum, of the Helvetii. Now, the auxiliary troops also have a present participle here, venientibus, right? It's ablative because it's describing auxiliaries. So in other words, it's saying they turn and fight with the coming auxiliary, right? The oncoming auxiliary troops of the Helvetii. Remember, they try to circle around the Romans, so that third battle line turns to fight them. Okay? And now we end with this. You have tandem Helvetii, impetus Romanorum non diutius sustinere possunt. Okay, so finally, or at last, the Helvetii, right, the Helvetians, they are no longer able, possunt, right, non possunt, they are no, diutius means longer, right, so they are no longer able to sustinere, to sustain or endure the impetus Romanorum, the attack of the Romans. Okay, so the Helvetii aren't able to withstand this attack anymore. You have alteri in summum colum se recipiunt, alteri ad impedimenta fugiunt. So some of them, you have alteri, alter, some others, right? Just plural. So some of them retreat, se recipiunt, right? They retreat in summum colum, onto the top of the hill. Others, fugiunt, they flee ad impedimenta, right? To the baggage train. Remember, we kind of said that when armies march in, they have their baggage with them, right? So their camp. Then you have etiam ibi fortes Helvetii, tela in Romanos appropinquantes miton. So even or also, so they're even. So in other words, ibi there, even the fortes Helvetii, the brave Helvetii, they meton, they send tela, right? Their weapons. So here it's not pila because that's what the Romans fight with. Tela here, when you're saying they're sending weapons, it could be arrows, it could be spears, javelins. That's probably what it is. But they're throwing stuff into the Romanos appropinquantes, right? Into the approaching Romans. All right. So there's sort of this last stand where they're still fighting it out. Then you have tandem Romani, Helvetios superant. So finally, or at last, the Romans conquer, superant, right? They overcome or conquer Helvetios, the Helvetians. Then you end with this line. You have propter hanc victoriam, Caesar imperator appellator. Okay, so because of, propter means like because of or on account of. So on account of hanc victoriam, this victory, Caesar, Caesar, appellator was called or is called imperator. Imperator meaning like the conqueror, right? It almost is the same word for emperor, but like commander, leader is kind of the idea, right? So he gets that title. Okay, so this is a fun story just describing, Caesar's encounter with the Helvetii. It is based on a real battle, so I'd encourage you, if you want to look up the Gallic Wars, that's kind of where we're starting to turn. So the Road to Latin textbook is really built to help you understand Caesar and De Bello Gallico, which is often kind of the first thing that students will read in terms of unadapted or original Latin, right? So if you're doing the AP curriculum, I know it's going to be changing soon, but still the AP curriculum includes sort of this version, these books of Caesar, right? De Bello Gallico. So that's what it's building you up to do. So you're starting to see kind of modified version of real events. So I'd encourage you to go look it up. If you're interested in the history, it's a really interesting sort of topic to cover. So feel free to look at it. But it's also hitting at the culture unit we're talking about, right? Of how Caesar's army functioned, the triple battle line. Now you're seeing it in action, right? And how maneuverable it was and why Caesar uses this, right? You can have the first two battle lines doing one thing. In this battle, the third battle line is able to turn and kind of save the day. And you're getting a sense of how the Romans fought, right? And that military aspect is definitely a major part of Roman history. So hopefully this all made sense and you're feeling pretty comfortable, with the Latin. There's a pretty good dose of fifth declension nouns in there. There's also fourth declension nouns that we've been working on. So it's just a nice way to review your noun endings without anything too like drastic or major in terms of the grammar. And like I said, now we're getting away from those short stories that are made up and you're getting into more real things. Okay. So hopefully it made some sense, but if you have any questions all about my translation, anything like that, feel free to put them in the comments below. I'm always happy to help you. Just let me know what you need, but otherwise keep practicing it. And again, you're trying to get to a point where you can read through this entire story. You don't need any help. And if you're able to do that and understand it, you can feel really confident that you're in a good place. And again, as long as your translation is somewhat